Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Heidi Hulst, and I work for the Department of Defense in the Office of Energy, Installations, and Environment. I support communication and outreach activities for this office, and it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to this virtual public engagement. This information and listening session focuses on the DoD policy entitled Prioritization of Department of Defense Cleanup Actions to Implement the Federal Drinking Water Standards for Per- and Polyfluoroalkyl Substances under the Department of Defense Environmental Restoration Program, which was published on September 3rd, 2024. We will refer to this as the DoD PFAS MCL policy or the DoD policy during this event. Our purpose this evening is to convey information about the DoD policy and to listen to public feedback about the policy to better understand community perspectives, and it is not intended to address ongoing site-specific PFAS cleanup investigations or actions. Before we begin, I want to call your attention to a few administrative items. This is a public event and it is being recorded. A final recording of this event will be provided on the DoD PFAS website public outreach page within 2 weeks of the conclusion of today's session. Your attendance or participation in this event means you consent to information being recorded and understand information such as your name or dial-in number may be visible to other participants in the virtual meeting environment and in the recording. If you need to leave this session, you may contact DODECCO at ageiss-inc.com to submit a comment or question instead of attending or participating during this public session. The website address and email address are displayed on all slides presented during today's session. As the agenda indicates, DoD will provide opening remarks and a presentation, and then hear verbal comments from community members until 7:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Each community member is allotted 2 minutes for remarks. Our event host is the Honorable Brendan Owens, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment. Our policy presentation is provided by Ms. Alexandria Long, Director of Cleanup and Compliance from DoD's Office of Energy, Installations, and Environment. And our facilitator is Mr. Tim Sultanfuss with DoD's Contract Support Team with Aegis and Galen Driscoll. Thank you for listening to these administrative details. I would now like to introduce our host. Please allow me to introduce Honorable Brendan Owens, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment. Mr. Owens is the Principal Advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment for matters relating to energy, installations, and environment. He provides leadership and oversight for an array of installation-related programs, including, but not limited to, housing, DoD's real property portfolio encompassing millions of acres at more than 500 installations, cultural resources, and environmental cleanup and compliance. Sir, over to you for remarks.
Thanks, Heidi. Just can you do a quick mic check? We up?
Sir, we hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Thanks, and Heidi, I appreciate the introduction. Let's see, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and half a day if you're joining from Guam. As Heidi said, I'm Brendan Owens. I'm the ASD for Energy, Installations, and Environment for DoD. And the team and I want to welcome everybody who's taken the few moments that we have tonight to get together and let you know that we sincerely appreciate the time that you are dedicating and sharing with us today. This is a significant effort on our team's part to make sure that this event is both informative, enduring, and very professional. And I want to thank them all up front for doing all that. We understand from y'all's perspective how challenging it can be to balance the many priorities that are pulling at us right now, whether it's family, whether it's work, whether it's any of the other things that are going on in the world right now. And just want to make sure that we are greatly appreciative of the effort that was put in for y'all to be here tonight, and hope that we can deliver content and information that is dignifies and honors that commitment that you're making. So we do have a lot to get through tonight, and we have significant things that we want to share about how DoD is incorporating US EPA's drinking water standards into DoD policy. We also have dedicated a significant chunk of this time to allow for your fellow community members to share their thoughts about ways that DoD can improve its process going forward. And I'm really looking forward to hearing that, because there's always a moment in our team where we are constantly looking to iterate, constantly looking to learn, constantly looking to incorporate good ideas that to make us a more effective partnership across both the Department of Defense, but also at the deck plate with the installations and the communities, the defense communities that are integral parts of our mission on the ground. So my team has been responding to questions related to this policy for the past several weeks. I want to thank the community members who specifically asked DoD and my team to pull together this engagement. This suggestion is to convene a public forum in this way is another opportunity for us to provide context and information about this policy. But again, like I said, it's also an opportunity for cross-community collaboration and cross-community knowledge exchange, which I really look forward to hearing. So the information and listening session is an important extension of a larger community outreach effort that's been ongoing for all of my time that I've been able to be in this job. And it's going to be certainly enduring. It was here before I got here, and it will be certainly here after I leave. But it gives us an opportunity to engage with community members on PFAS policy and the continued work that must be done to enable DoD to conduct and complete PFAS cleanup effectively and efficiently. So as Heidi said, Ms. Alexandria Long is going to take us through a presentation about this policy, and we're going to offer additional explanatory information about DoD's approach to implementing EPA's drinking water rule in our PFAS cleanup actions. But before Alex goes into that, I'd like to share a couple of thoughts to just level set in terms of how this policy was created and how it is resonating with our team. A little bit about what's going on in terms of how we've been pulling this together. So first, in reality, is first. This policy is a first step in prioritizing what DoD needs to do to implement EPA's PFAS drinking water rule as it applies to DoD PFAS cleanup efforts. The policy directs actions the department will take to address locations with the highest levels of PFAS in private drinking water wells first. And the policy also directs longer-term remedial actions where the drinking water levels or background levels, as appropriate, will be used as the final cleanup standard. DoD believes that these initial steps are both pragmatic and risk-informed as an approach to protect long-term human health and the environment. But these are initial steps, and they will evolve. Our plan will evolve. Our policy will evolve as we continue to accelerate DoD's cleanup efforts nationwide in accordance with federal law and in partnership with regulatory agencies and affected communities. We will update this policy periodically, taking into consideration the results of ongoing investigations and the sampling data that we receive as part of those investigations. The presentation that Alex is going to share is intended to guide us through this policy and provide clarification about all of the things that I just said, but it's also been structured to tackle head-on many of the frequently asked questions that we've received over the last several weeks since this policy was issued and released. Once again, we sincerely appreciate your time and attention on these important matters. We all view forums like this as important opportunities to engage with our community leaders and to engage on a challenging set of issues that really are going to be significant in terms of how we structure our response going forward. Secretary Austin often reminds us that the only way that we will succeed is through teamwork, and that's certainly going to be true as we move ahead on PFAS work. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim Saltonfuss to walk us through the next steps for tonight's engagement, and I'll join you at the end to share some closing remarks. So Tim, over to you.
Thank you, sir, and hello to everyone. My name is Tim Saltonfuss, and I'll serve as facilitator for our information listening session this evening. In addition to welcoming community members from all the way across the country, we also welcome congressional staff, leadership, and staff from the military departments, state and federal agencies, and tribal representatives. The purpose of this information listening session is to convey information about the DoD policy and to listen to public feedback about the policy to better understand community perspectives. As Heidi mentioned, our agenda begins with Honorable Owen's remarks, and it will continue with an information briefing about the DoD policy, followed by a verbal comment period and closing remarks. We would like to ensure a cordial and professional atmosphere during today's session, and we ask that everyone obey a few ground rules. Please remain respectful and courteous, acknowledge diverse perspectives, and focus comments on the DoD policy. This session is being recorded. As a reminder, by attending today's virtual meeting, your attendance or participation in this event means you consent to information being recorded and understand information such as your name or dial-in number may be visible to other participants in the virtual meeting environment and the recording. If you need to leave the session, you may contact DoD ECCO at ageiss-inc.com to submit a comment or question instead of attending or participating during this public session. All attendees are in listen-only mode until the verbal comment period, when certain registered attendees will come off mute to share their comments. During the verbal comment period, a timer will be visible on screen to ensure the 2-minute time limit is observed. If you need technical assistance, please email that same email address, dodecco@ageiss-inc.com. This email address is also displayed on the presentation slides. A video will be disabled for commenters during the verbal comment period. For those community members who signed up to make a verbal comment, please ensure that your Zoom name is the same as the name you used when registering. You can do so by clicking on the 3 dots to the right of your name and selecting Rename. It's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Alexandria Long, who will provide an information briefing about the DoD policy.
Thank you, Tim. Can you see me and hear me?
I can, yes, please. Thank you.
Wonderful. On September 3rd, 2024, the Department of Defense published a policy titled Prioritization of Department of Defense Cleanup Actions to Implement the Federal Drinking Water Standards for PFAS under the Defense Environmental Restoration Program. Over the next few minutes, I will provide an overview and explain the policy in more detail. The department follows the Federal Cleanup Law, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA, for all chemicals in our cleanup program, including PFAS. More information about DoD and CERCLA is available on DoD's PFAS website. The website address is defense.gov/PFAS and is provided on the bottom of the slides. The purpose of this policy is to ensure a prioritized and consistent DoD approach as we incorporate EPA's PFAS drinking water standards into DoD's ongoing CERCLA cleanups. We know that we are going to have quite a few off-base drinking water wells that need to be addressed and action taken to reduce PFAS levels from DoD activities. This guidance includes a prioritized approach to ensure that we identify and address the worst first. Some objectives of the policy are: first, We needed a consistent nationwide approach across the Department of Defense that updated our prior action level of 70 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA in drinking water. We wanted to prioritize and focus our initial efforts to address private drinking water wells with the highest levels of PFAS from known DoD releases in our worst first approach. We wanted to be very clear that we are incorporating EPA's PFAS MCLs in our cleanup process. Finally, we wanted to ensure that when we are conducting our remedial investigations, they include a site-specific assessment for background levels of PFAS. EPA published a final rule establishing nationwide drinking water standards for certain PFAS under the Safe Drinking Water Act. EPA's drinking water rule includes enforceable maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, for 5 PFAS: PFOA, PFAS, PFNA, Gen X, and PFHXS. It also includes a hazard index MCL for a mixture of 2 or more of PFHXS, PFNA, PFBS, and Gen X. The individual MCLs are in parts per trillion, and each is listed on the slide. This rule became effective on June 25th, 2024, and provides 5 years for regulated public water systems to comply with the MCLs. This DoD policy is part of a larger coordinated approach to address DoD's PFAS releases. We've been working on addressing our PFAS releases since 2016. We've completed the first phase in the cleanup process, the preliminary assessment site inspection, at 712 installations and National Guard facilities to identify potential releases of PFAS from DoD activities. As of June 2024, 580 of those locations require further investigation under a remedial investigation, which is the next phase in the CERCLA process. During this phase, DoD assesses the extent of the PFAS release to determine the most appropriate response actions. We have initiated the remedial investigation phase at over 350 of the 580 locations where a remedial investigation is needed. DoD previously took interim actions to address off-base drinking water wells at 55 installations where we found levels of PFAS and PFOA above 70 parts per trillion during our preliminary assessment phase. These 55 locations are where, per our policy, we are going to focus our efforts first, since these locations are where we found the levels of PFAS in drinking water to be highest nationwide. At the same time we are conducting our remedial investigations and addressing private drinking water wells, we will also continue taking interim actions to prevent further plume migration off of our installations per our July 2023 policy. We will continue to employ the most current EPA detection methods and use EPA-approved laboratories to ensure the highest data quality. We will also continue our endeavor to be transparent throughout our cleanup process, providing quarterly updates and drinking water sampling results on our DoD PFAS website. We say this guidance provides a prioritized approach to address private drinking water wells. What does that really mean? DoD is incorporating the MCLs into our cleanup program, but given the large number of private wells that we anticipate will need to be addressed, the department is focusing initial efforts on those wells with the highest PFAS levels. The department will first take action to address PFAS in private drinking water wells with levels at or above 3 times the rule's MCLs. So, for example, DoD's previous interim action level for drinking water was 70 parts per trillion for only PFAS and PFOA. We now have replaced that with a lower level of 12 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA individually, and included additional PFAS that will be considered to trigger interim actions. This allows DoD to take action now to address the highest levels of PFAS first, while we continue our remedial investigations. With the sampling results we already have,
we know that the 55 locations PFAS levels were found above 70 parts per trillion in drinking water. Those locations are where the highest known levels of PFAS in drinking water from DoD activities have been found, and why those locations will be included in the first phase of our prioritized approach. For example, at those locations, we have already taken action for wells above 70 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA, and now we will take action for private wells with PFAS levels above 3 times the PFAS MCLs. During our remedial investigations at other locations, if we find additional private drinking water wells that are above 3 times the MCLs resulting from DoD releases, we will also take action there. Because we anticipate a significantly large number of drinking water wells that will require interim actions, we intend to focus resources on expediting more enduring solutions. The policy identifies the prioritized order of treatment alternatives: providing connections to public water systems, installing whole house treatment systems, providing point of use treatment systems, or providing bottled water. DoD also intends to expedite action at public water systems to address PFAS impacts. As we keep highlighting, we are incorporating EPA's MCLs into our entire cleanup program. So we will also address wells that are below 3 times the MCLs as part of the remedial action process. We will address drinking water down to the MCLs or background as appropriate. What is background, and how is DoD using it in our investigations? Background levels refer to chemicals such as PFAS that are not from releases at the cleanup site. For example, rain and residential septic systems have been shown to result in measurable levels of PFAS. One of our priorities is to establish site-specific background levels of PFAS during the remedial investigation. If background levels are below the MCLs, then we will clean up to the MCLs. If we find background levels are above the MCLs, we will work with regulatory agencies to determine the final cleanup levels for that site. Under the DoD policy, however, interim actions are taken at the prioritized action level of at or above 3 times the EPA MCLs without an investigation of site-specific background levels. Establishing an initial prioritized action level enables DoD to take action now as site-specific background levels of PFAS are presumed to be below 3 times the MCLs. This approach allows DoD to address those locations where PFAS levels are highest, while concurrently working with our supporting regulatory agencies to establish background levels for each site. Moving forward, this policy's prioritized approach expedites the implementation of consistent interim actions nationwide with the focus on the worst first. As I mentioned, the previous interim action level for drinking water was 70 parts per trillion for only PFAS and PFOA. We now have replaced that with a lower level for PFAS and PFOA of 12 parts per trillion and included additional PFAS that will be considered to trigger interim actions. This prioritized approach is necessary because of the large number of private drinking water wells that we anticipate will require action, and is consistent with the federal cleanup law and its regulations. DoD believes this is the best approach for the long-term protection of human health and the environment, and it will continue to accelerate DoD's cleanup efforts nationwide in accordance with federal law and in partnership with regulatory agencies and affected communities. We will update this guidance periodically, as Mr. Owens mentioned, as investigations continue and more sampling data is received. This policy is part of a coordinated and holistic approach on DoD-wide efforts to address PFAS. Since we released the policy, we have received a few questions from community members. We also received questions during the registration process for this event. We have consolidated the most frequently asked questions about the policy and DoD's responses on the next 2 slides. We have also published frequently asked questions to the DoD PFAS website at defense.gov/PFAS, As a reminder, the email address for the website is at the bottom right of these slides. I will share the questions and the responses now. How and why did DoD decide to use 3 times the MCLs as an initial action level? As mentioned earlier, DoD anticipates a significant number of private drinking water wells, potentially thousands of wells, will require interim actions that cannot all be completed at once. While DoD considered several factors when developing its prioritized approach, this 3 times the PFAS MCL action level presumes that site-specific background levels for individual PFAS are below these levels. This approach allows DoD to address those locations where PFAS levels are the highest without having to wait to establish background levels for each site. Background levels are determined later during the remedial investigation. How quickly will the September policy be implemented? The intent is for DoD components to take immediate action to accelerate investigations, prioritize resources to identify impacted private drinking water wells that are at or above 3 times the MCL action levels, and implement interim actions per the policy within the CERCLA framework. Site-specific conditions and characteristics will impact individual implementation schedules, but there should be no delay in initiating implementation of the policy, and DoD has already identified 55 locations with the highest levels of PFAS that should be considered a priority. What does DoD mean by prioritize permanent solutions or prioritize enduring solutions? The September 2024 DoD PFAS cleanup policy identifies several enduring solutions, including water treatment technologies that can be used to address the action levels identified in this DoD policy, and directs the military departments to consider more sustainable solutions when examining alternatives. In prioritized order, the department will consider providing connections to municipal systems, installing whole house treatment systems, and providing point of use treatment systems. DoD will only provide bottled water, which is not currently regulated for PFAS, when more sustainable alternatives, such as drinking water treatment, are technically infeasible due to site-specific conditions. Does DoD provide notification to households that potentially have PFAS in their drinking water wells? When DoD identifies that it may need to sample a private drinking water well, the private homeowner where the well is located will receive a written notification. The notification provides information about next steps in the sampling process and includes information regarding the possible presence of PFAS in their private drinking water well, DoD's efforts to investigate and address PFAS impacts resulting from DoD activities, and the opportunity for the homeowner to have their private drinking water well tested for PFAS at no cost. Once sampling and testing is completed, supplementary letters are provided back to the private homeowner who consented to the sampling. Letters contain information about the levels of PFAS detected in their private drinking water well, whether the level identified means alternative water or treatment will be provided, and informational resources where homeowners can find the latest information on PFAS. What are background levels, and how is DoD including background in its PFAS investigations? As I mentioned earlier, background levels refer to chemicals such as PFAS that are not from releases at the cleanup site. For example, rainwater and residential septic systems have been shown to result in measurable levels of PFAS. DoD will work with EPA and state regulators as appropriate to evaluate background levels of PFAS during the detailed remedial investigation process. Under the DoD policy, however, interim actions are taken at the prioritized action levels at or above 3 times the EPA MCLs, without an investigation of site-specific background levels. How does DoD's September policy apply to the cleanup of future sources of drinking water? DoD's first priority is to address current human exposure to the highest levels of PFAS from DoD activities. DoD will follow the CERCLA process to develop remedial actions to clean up groundwater used for drinking water. If there is groundwater that has a potential future use as drinking water at a location, it will be evaluated and addressed as part of the department's long-term remedial actions and considered when establishing a site's final cleanup goals.
Thank you, Ms. Long. And it's now our opportunity to move to our next agenda topic, which is a verbal comment period. Although DoD will not provide direct responses to input that it receives during this verbal comment period, DoD will carefully consider input as it implements this policy and looks to develop future policies associated with its response to PFAS. The input received will help determine if more information may be needed to increase awareness of the policy, and will be aggregated and integrated into the frequently asked questions on DoD's public PFAS website. Community members who requested to provide a verbal comment will now speak in the order in which they registered. We will proceed from one verbal comment to the next in order based on this sequence. If time permits, we may also be able to hear from some of the registered participants currently on standby to offer a comment. I'd now like to provide instructions to those community members selected to make a verbal comment during this information and listening session. We will call each community member by name when it is their turn to make a comment. At that time, Zoom will ask you to unmute your microphone. Then you will need to unmute yourself on your device. Please abide by our ground rules, which will be displayed for reference, and focus your comments on the DoD policy. Each commenter will have a 2-minute time period to deliver their comment. We will display a 2-minute countdown timer and the names of upcoming commenters so you'll be able to see when your time is coming and when it will be your turn to speak. When your name is called, please begin speaking within 15 seconds. If we do not hear from you within 30 seconds of your allotted time, we will invite the next commenter to speak, and we will not be able to return to you and hear your comment. After 2 minutes, your microphone will be muted automatically, and we will transition to the next person in the queue. We will maintain a quick pace so that as many comments as possible are heard by 7:25 p.m. Eastern. Any comments not voiced this evening can also be sent via email to dodecco@ageiss-inc.com. I would like to offer a reminder that this meeting is being recorded, and our recording will be available within 2 weeks of the conclusion of this event on the DoD PFAS website. I will now call our first commenter, Andrea Amico.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Mr. Owens, and thank you to your team for hosting this town hall. My name is Andrea Amico. I'm from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, home to the former Pease Air Force Base. I have been a community advocate on PFAS issues for the last 10 years, and I am the Pease RAB community co-chair. I appreciate you saying the 9-3 memo is just the initial steps, but it is vague and lacks teeth and timelines. It offers no comfort or clarity to families and communities that have been exposed to PFAS for years due to no fault of their own. The EPA set PFAS MCLs earlier this year based in science because the evidence is clear. Some PFAS are toxic to humans at incredibly low levels. Due to DoD's historical use of AFFF, communities have been exposed to PFAS in their drinking water for decades. PFAS bioaccumulate and cause multiple health issues. DoD delaying action on some wells has been and will continue to be detrimental to human health. For private wells with PFAS levels 3 times below the MCLs, those homeowners don't have time to wait years for DoD to intervene when they've already experienced years of exposure. And how are you going to tell some residents of the same city or town that their private well water will be cleaned up while their neighbors have to wait years for intervention and access to safe water? DoD should not get to pick and choose a timeline of when they follow the law. The regulations are finally catching up and are now a much needed protection for communities. The time is now to intervene on all wells above the MCLs. Mr. Owens, as your time in this role is about to come to an end, you have the chance to leave a lasting effect on DoD's trajectory for addressing PFAS. Your legacy can have life-changing impacts on communities for years to come. Please consider revising your policy to address all wells above the MCLs immediately and have clear guidance and deadlines. And please allocate the staff, resources, and infrastructure to make this happen. We are talking about the Department of Defense. They have the ability to make this happen. Communities didn't ask to be exposed to PFAS in their water.
Andrea, thank you very much for your comments. I apologize. It appears we've reached the end of the 2-minute time limit. And we do want to continue on to hear perspectives from as many community members as possible. So let's turn next to Marcia Kappa. Marcia, over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. This policy seems to be designed to satisfy the greatest good for the funds available. In the case of PFAS contamination by Camp Grayling in Crawford County, Michigan, this would not apply. Potable water has been made available to qualified residents. Bottled water by DOD and point-of-use filters by the Michigan Health Department. This is a temporary measure until a long-term remedy is provided. The National Guard and the community are working together to provide such a remedy. I know this event is not supposed to address site-specific projects, but this policy is negatively impacting our progress. The CERCLA process is extremely slow. Meanwhile, PFAS contamination continues to spread. Our community is afraid to wait another 5 to 7 years to complete the CERCLA process for resolution. Hence, we pursued multiple municipal water at an interim remediation. Originally, the military was supposed to hook up homes over the EPA MCL, and state granted monies were obtained to hook up residents under EPA MCL in an effort to get everyone off the contaminated aquifers. Now, using the policy proposed, the military can connect only a fraction of the homes exceeding the EPA's MCL. A house with 18 points per trillion will hook up, but the neighbors with 11 or 9 points per trillion will be bypassed. Meanwhile, the military will need to continue to provide bottled water and regular testing of wells to residents that do not get hooked up right away, which is unnecessary cost when potable water is running by the residents. Now it will take several years to get a neighborhood hooked up instead of one. The military is responsible for this contamination and should pay for hooking up all homes exceeding EPA MCL. This policy makes the hookup process very inefficient and more costly. Thank you.
Marcia, thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate those. And we do want to turn next for comments from Kristen Mello. Kristen, over to you.
The opportunity to speak with you tonight. I am Kristen Mello, daughter of retired Lieutenant Colonel Edward Mello Jr. from Westfield, Massachusetts, home to Barnes Air National Guard Base and the 104th Fighter Wing, where we are preparing to welcome the F-35s and their even louder sound of freedom. In 2016, we learned that aqueous film-forming foam used in training exercises at the base contaminated municipal and private drinking water wells, and we were required to take action. That was prior to Barnes being reinstated into dirt. I would like to ask, how does this policy apply to host communities like Westfield, full of service member families and veterans who have suffered multi-generational PFAS exposure and continue to bear the additional financial burden of remedial actions that we were forced to take ourselves prior to DOD stepping up? And how many other communities are in this position? Here in Westfield, children have watched helpless as their mothers fight cancer. Mothers have watched helpless as their children develop kidney issues, and families have mourned infants that haven't survived. What can decision makers on this call tonight implement to ensure that the engagement DOD employees and contractors have with host communities do not re-victimize or further burden the civilian populations who have provided decades of vital mission support in their capacity as host community members? Finally, and I know it's not about your policy, I would like to thank you, Mr. Owens, Ms. Balkis, and the staff that has worked so hard on these community engagement events. Regular, reliable, transparent communication has done a great deal to improve relations between us, and I sincerely hope these events continue to take place. Thank you.
Kristen, thank you very much for your heartfelt comments there. I really do appreciate you sharing those. Let's turn next for comments to Anthony Spagnola. Anthony.
Thank you. I'm Tony Spagnola, co-chair of the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network and resident of Oscoda, Michigan, home of the former Wordsmith Air Force Base. USGS estimates that PFAS has contaminated water that supplies nearly 95 million Americans. This is an existential threat to people like me and communities like mine across the nation. Senator-elect Alyssa Slotkin, a former high-ranking Pentagon official, has said that the integrity of our water supply is a national security issue. As such, it falls squarely in the core mission of DoD to lead the attack on PFAS contaminated water supplies and to protect the American people with utmost urgency. To fulfill this mission, DoD should unequivocally embrace the national PFAS drinking water standards. It should work collaboratively with DoD impacted public water systems to ensure timely compliance. And it should similarly collaborate with communities with DoD impacted private wells at any levels above the national standards. The DoD PFAS policy memo falls substantially short of meeting these objectives. It starts with an artificial 3 times MCL floor. It leaves public water systems and private well owners in limbo indefinitely. It is filled with loopholes, and it places an outsized emphasis on so-called background levels of PFAS, which have been abused by DoD in communities like mine for years. We know that DoD can do better. In Grayling, Michigan, as Ms. Coppa mentioned, the Army has collaborated with the community to seek funding for the extension of public water lines to impacted private well owners. Due to the policy memo, that effort is now in jeopardy. A DoD effort to provide bottled waters to impacted well owners in Pennsylvania is now being thwarted due to a footnote in the policy. I ask that DoD listen to communities and collaborate going forward as we fight this important challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. We appreciate your comments. We'd now like to turn next for comments to Thomas Ames.
Thank you. I'm with the Horsham Land Redevelopment Authority. I believe DoD could more efficiently utilize its funding for PFAS responses by looking critically at locations where similar investigative work and response actions are being done by separate services. An example is in Horsham, Pennsylvania, where the Navy is working on remedial actions to address PFAS groundwater contamination at the former NAS-JRB Willow Grove, a BRACT closed base, while the Air National Guard is doing similar work at the still open Biddle Air Guard base. There are 2 consultants, 2 investigations, 2 planned interim remedial groundwater treatment systems with 2 separate discharge permits. The groundwater contamination is the result of spills and releases of AFFF by 2 DoD components. The groundwater doesn't know which DoD component contaminated the environment. Cost savings could be made if there was one service, such as the Navy, assigned as the lead responder with 1 treatment plant, 1 discharge point, and 1 permit. These cost savings could be applied to communities where the immediate need is to provide safe drinking water for homes impacted by past DoD actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Ames. We'd now like to turn to our next comment from Jennifer Rawlinson. Jennifer.
Hello.
Hi,
Good
I can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to participate, and hopefully you can hear me. My name is Jennifer Rawlinson. I'm here as a representative from Newburgh Clean Water Project and as a mother and lifelong resident from the city of Newburgh here in New York. Our community is an environmental justice and PFAS impacted community sourced from the Stewart Air National Guard base. I just want to say that it's imperative that policies appreciate and follow the latest science to ensure families are safe. By understanding PFAS exposure at even the lowest levels, they can be linked to devastating illnesses. MCLs were adjusted to meet the science, and it's quite alarming to me that there is an attempt to set precedent and disregard those very protective measures for, in my opinion, the sake of ease. DoD should not be given this flexibility to choose or distort what policies they deem worthy, much less, how to interpret them. The recently established MCLs were, applauded across this nation, and it seems a slap in the face to every advocate, every family who has fought to ensure communities continue to acquire not only some remediation steps, but intentional and impactful steps to remediate and also to heal. And that's all I'm going to say, but I thank this office for giving space for the countless communities that are here tonight and will be listening later on Thank you for letting us be heard and also be seen. Night.
Well, Jennifer, thank you very much for sharing those comments. We would now like to turn to our next commenter, Michael High. Michael, over to you. And we are not hearing Michael High. We just want to give some time for Michael High to come off mute if he is with us. If not, we'll continue on for another 15 seconds or so before we move on to our next commenter. Is Michael High with us? Okay, well, thank you. Let's go ahead and progress on then to the next commenter, Alan McPeak. Alan, over to you.
Thank you. Alan McPeak, Restoration Advisory Board member, former NISJRB, Willow Grove, near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I want to thank the DoD for addressing our contamination in a meaningful way. My understanding is that we're in early implementation of remediation, that this may apply to other installations. The first thing I would like to say is the DoD can have an immediate effect on human health in the fastest way by providing point of use filters for anyone who asks. Just have people sign up and mail them a point of use filter and put them on a filtered schedule. My other question is more technical. My comment. My understanding is NISJRB is a pilot. The remediation method will be extraction, filtering, and disposal to surface streams. This will amount to 20 to 25% of our total municipal extraction. We need to find a way to preserve our groundwater rather than extraction and disposal. Is there any way that this water can be saved and reused or re-injected? And I'd like to speak to the other commenters, the heartfelt comments from the other people in the rest of the country. It's just unbelievable what we're going through, and it was very meaningful. Thank you.
Mr. McPeak, thank you very much for joining, for sharing those comments. I do want to also just provide a reminder to everyone on the call that if you do have comments or questions, you can submit those via email to that email address I mentioned before, dodecco@aegis-inc.com. But let's move on to our next commenter, Lenny Siegel. Over to you, Lenny. And we are not hearing anything yet. Do we have Lenny Siegel on? Okay, we'll give another 15 seconds or so for Lenny to come on, and then if not, we'll move on to our next commenter. So Lenny, just one last chance to see if you're with us tonight. Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's move on to Joseph Campbell. Over to Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell, Seneca Lake Guardian in the Finger Lakes region of New York. The DoD has known since at least 2017 that there are high levels of PFAS in certain areas of the former Seneca Army Depot in Romulus, New York. One site on the eastern boundary was found to have 89,000 parts per trillion, and 3 times MCLs were found in at least one nearby private well used for drinking water. Testing performed by the New York Department of Health on the southwestern boundary of the base, off base in 2018, found levels of PFAS in one dug well at over 41 parts per trillion, and in a drilled well on the same property at over 31 parts per trillion. Independent testing by a watchdog organization performed this year also found levels of PFAS at more than the 3 times the EPA limit in Kendaya Creek, indicating that the contamination is spreading off base and migrating towards Seneca Lake, a drinking water resource for 100,000 residents. The sampling and remediation plan calls for testing at 38 sites on the depot property. This was completed in the summer of 2023, and the completion date of the reports was supposed to be October. When does the DoD plan on releasing the data so that the public is informed? A memo prioritizes testing of private wells surrounding the depot. The map and figure 1F of the remedial investigation plan of 4 known PFAS sites shows that the groundwater flows to the west towards Seneca Lake. When does the DoD plan on mapping the extent and direction of the plumes off-site so that people know whether the water they are drinking is safe? And when can we expect those results? Does the DoD plan on mapping plumes on the eastern side that may be migrating toward Cayuga Lake that also serves as drinking water for 50,000 residents? Thank you for this opportunity.
Mr. Campbell, thank you very much for joining us, for sharing your comments. We'll now turn to our next commenter, David Dow.
I am Dr. David Dow.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Dr. David Dow, a resident of the Wacoit Bay watershed on Upper Cape Cod. The Fire Training Area 1 plume from Joint Base Cape Cod contains PFAS 6 levels at 20 parts per trillion, above the state standard. Previously, the Shumat Valley plume closed the private drinking water wells in Yearling Meadows where I lived and led to construct connection to the Falmouth public drinking water supply system. The town in the Shumat Valley public drinking water well was closed because of toxic contaminants of concern. In more recent time, GAC fillers were placed on public drinking water wells in Falmouth and Mashpee to prevent PFAS chemicals. The Air Force Civil Engineering Center has spent over $1.2 billion since the early 1990s to support the Safe Drinking Water Act and Superfund cleanup at Joint Base Cape Cod. My recommendation is for a pilot project to explore regulating PFAS chemicals as a class for a minimum contaminant level or maximum contaminant level, since there are thousands of isomers with a variety of biological, chemical, geological, and physical properties, which leads to multiple exposure pathways. Most current PFAS measurement techniques provide estimates of 40 to 60 chemicals with carbon-14 bonds. The pilot project locales with PFAS pollution where action has been taken would be a good basis for developing a class-based MCL for PFAS chemicals. Thank you.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Dr. Dow. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate your presence tonight. Let's turn to Dan Shapley for comments. Dan?
Hello, Dan Shapley. I work for Hudson Riverkeeper, and I'm also serve as a secretary of the Restoration Advisory Board for the Stewart Air National Guard Base near Newburgh, New York, in the Hudson Valley. A couple of concerns, many have been addressed by other speakers. One, if the MCL is violated in a private well, bottled water should be provided, period. There shouldn't be an exception. The MCL is there for a reason. I understand the need to prioritize certain ways, worst first, but provision of clean water has to be a high priority, and the MCL is the threshold. In cases like Stewart, alternatives or filtration are in place for impacted public water supplies. And I do want to make sure that this policy will not deprioritize interim removal actions that would reduce or eliminate the source of contamination at water sources that are affected, even if they are being addressed through filtration or an alternative water source currently, because the long-term restoration of public water supplies should be a high priority that should not be undermined by a policy such as this. Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment, and that's the end of mine. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much for sharing your perspective. We appreciate that. We'd like to move next for comments to Joseph Villegas, please, sir.
Buenos dias a Dios, Honorable Assistant Secretary Brennan Owens. Greetings from New Mexico. Chaplain Jose Angumea Lorenzo Villegas Sr. On behalf of La Cienega Land Grant Association and the Texas Band of Yaqui Indians, I'm a tribal administrator for government affairs in DC. I have been a first responder, police, fire, military chaplain for over 34 years. Currently, I serve the New Mexico National Guard State Defense Force as a military chaplain. My private well and surrounding indigenous community located in Santa Fe, New Mexico has been contaminated with the high concentrations of this triple AAFF industrial chemicals from the aviation support facility in my community. Our primary safe drinking water is the primary water source is going to be the groundwater, the aquifer, and we've been dependent on the private well for 55 years. Plus, we have not had a public water system since 1968. We purchase water from water bottles from Walmart as a secondary option for safe drinking water source, bathing, cooking since November of 2023. This is unacceptable. The municipalities have abandoned us, and we are fending to ourselves. My PFAS blood tests and results were confirmed positive with 3 times beyond the CDC PFAS concentration levels. The Army announced this July 26th program, a joint sampling for PFAS, but our local military base is not included. We're concerned that it's going to migrate this contamination of private wells and contamination spreading to the pueblos of Cochiti and Santo Domingo. Why aren't the testing wells taking place at all locations with risk? The testing should not be a pilot program. Testing should be at all PFAS locations where PFAS threatens our drinking water. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Villegas. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your questions. As a reminder to everyone, down there, bottom right of your screen is that email address, dodecho@aegis-inc.com. If you have comments, questions, feel free to submit those as well. Let's turn now to Mindy Gibson. Mindy, over to you.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I am Mindy Gibson. I am from the city of Satellite Beach. I serve on the Restoration Advisory Board for Patrick Space Force Base, formerly known as Patrick Air Force Base. I am also the vice mayor until tomorrow due to term limits of the city of Satellite Beach. We found out about these contaminations when I was very newly elected. My complaint to you from a local government perspective is the complete and utter lack of communication that we received from the DoD. We had Aaron Brockovich come to my city, which is never a fun thing. We had a community that was terrified. And while our drinking water is not directly affected by the contamination at Patrick Space Force is rated at 4.2 million parts per trillion. We have had groundwater testing amounts up as high as 400 parts per trillion. And we have unbelievably high rates of DIPG brain cancers, which Cannon Air Force Base has published an article stating that they believe that it is linked to PFAS and PFOA. We have 4 people on one street that have ALS on one street that is very close to that base. We have tested everything with our own money with the city, and we do not have a large budget. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars digging wells and testing the water ourselves. And the only contamination that we have in our water is PFAS. We have run into situations where DoD is not looking to even clean up Patrick anytime soon, because my understanding is nobody wants to take responsibility. It was previously a naval site in the 40s and became an Air Force site much longer after that.
Mindy, thank you very much. And I appreciate you sharing your comments and your concerns with us as well. We have reached the end of that 2-minute time limit. I do want to continue on so that we can hear perspectives from as many different community members as possible during this time. Let's go next to Roberto Jaramillo. Roberto, over to you.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having me today. My name is Roberto Jaramillo, and I am with Las Aguas Unified Community Advisory Board in Tucson, Arizona. My biggest concern is, how does the Air Force or DoD determine if a community does not have any imminent health issues, where in fact, I've lived in this Superfund site for quite some time. We know very well there is imminent health issues in our community. Another concern that I have the aquifer, Tucson, Arizona's primary source of water is the Colorado River. But if it weren't for the Colorado River, we'd have to tap into the aquifer that we have outside the Homer Air Guard base in Tucson, Arizona. Uh, I have to give kudos to Tucson Mayor and Council and Tucson Water Department for their initiative they have taken with cleaning up the plume that we have. But in regards to that, if and when we get cut off from the Colorado River, we're gonna have a big concern because we will be without water. So that is my concern. Thank you much.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your comments, sharing your concerns, Mr. Jaramillo. We appreciate that. Let's turn next to a comment from Catherine Leopold. Catherine, over to you.
Kathy Leopold, Box Elder, South Dakota. We are about a mile away from Ellsworth Air Force Base. Period. Ellsworth was dealing with the TCE contamination from the 1990s, and then in about 2020, they notified us that we also had PFAS in our well. We are okay. My husband and I, Ellsworth hooked us up to city water, so we're fine. But there are lots of farmers and ranchers in our area that are very concerned because even if potable water is delivered to them via bottled water, they're concerned about their livestock in that they've been experiencing a lot of stillbirths with their cattle. They don't know if irrigation from the rivers and streams in our area that have been contaminated with PFAS is contaminating the crops that they grow. The PFAS has been found as far down as the Cheyenne River, which is about 50 miles away. And the people in my area are just really concerned about more than just the potable water for people. They want to know about their crops. They want to know about their livestock. And although Ellsworth is really good about providing information, there's no specific information on whether or not what they're doing is safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. We appreciate you joining us tonight and sharing that comment. Let's turn next to Hope Gross for a comment. Hope.
Good evening, Mr. Owens. I'm Hope Gross with Bucksmont Coalition for Safer Water. My first comment is for the EPA. Where are you? How is this memo even possible where the polluter gets to call the shots, make up its own playbook? This is your regulation. The science says that anything over 4 parts per trillion is unsafe to drink. Where is our protection in this DoD policy? My comments to the DoD, for starters, please reconsider this policy and uphold the drinking water regulation as it's written with no loopholes, and provide immediate access to bottled water without the need for a waiver to residents with private wells above the MCL. Our residents deserve full protection. You have the power, the ability, the unlimited resources to get safe drinking water to the communities you have poisoned. You continue to ask Congress for less money each year to clean up PFAS. And now you need to issue a policy that lets you prioritize who gets safe water to drink and who doesn't. You are the military. You give commands, details, directives with timelines to be followed day in and day out. This is how my military works, yet somehow this policy lacks details. How and when will private well owners get help? What are the timelines? What are the specific directives? You have handcuffed the boots on the ground instead of empowering them. The mixed messages and muddied communication at the ground level is the direct result of an ambiguous policy that needs more clarity. For me and my community, we need full transparency, accountability, and immediate action, as our town has a lifetime of PFAS exposures. There can't be any more delays or excuses to following the EPA's federal drinking water policy because people are sick and dying in the hands of PFAS. We are thankful that the DoD funded this multi-health study showing communities with very high PFAS blood levels. Why would the DoD fund such a large health study and not find the funds and resources to follow the EPA regulations?
Hope, thank you very much for your comment. Obviously, a lot there. And I do want to remind you that there is that email address down at the bottom right where you can send in additional questions or comments that maybe you don't have time to get to. Let's continue on so that we can hear perspectives of some others. Let's turn to Melanie Lau, please. Melanie.
Hello, this is Melanie Lau, and I'm calling from Honolulu, Hawaii, where our Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam was just contaminated by 20 large tanks of fuel, which was finally removed. But we also have PFAS contamination. I actually signed up for this comment period more because I thought I might have questions. One of the questions I have is, in the private drinking wells, are you also considering public sources? We have a board of water supply that supplies all of our water. We only have one aquifer for the whole island. So it is important to us we don't have alternative sources. And I'm wondering if you're also including our board of water supply and our public supply in your quote private drinking well list of importance. The other comment I have is I noticed there are a lot of bases and former bases that I had never even heard of, and you have the similar problem that we have here, is that the Department of Defense has contaminated a lot of our water. And so I've noticed that the free flow of information is difficult because it needs to go up and down the chain of command because we have a defense critical status here. And I'm asking you to remove the defense critical status for these kinds of public health things. You don't have to tell me the secret stuff. I just want to know the data as it comes in a form that is usable and cullable so that we can make our own determination if the data is correct and also how to put it into categories. Thank you.
Melanie, thank you very much for your comment. Just to note that we see that Michael High has joined. Michael, we will attempt to come back your way for your comment later after a few other comments are made. Let's turn next for a comment by Melody Aduja.
Thank you very much. My name again is Melody Aduja. I am co-chair of the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party of Hawaii. And I'm also an elected member of the Community Representation Initiative under the 2023 consent order by the EPA, Navy, and the DLA. And I do want to say that as the prior speaker had mentioned, Melanie Lau, we do have a sole source aquifer in Hawaii on Oahu. So if there is any substantial contamination, the whole island will be affected. Currently, there's been contamination, but it has been of PFAS, and there has been 4 out of 21 monitoring wells where exceedances of PFAS was found. And those exceedances are according to the old MCLs. So it's at 70 parts per trillion. So I do want to say that the Department of Defense at the time of the spill, which is November 29, 2022, 1,300 gallons of AFFF with PFAS concentrate was released from the Red Hill Underground Bulk Storage Field Facility. The immediate cleanup efforts, including the use of absorbent pads and the excavation of contaminated soil and concrete, demonstrate a commendable commitment to mitigating environmental damage. However, the DoD's policy on PFAS, while proactive in many respects, still raises concerns about long-term adequacy and sufficiency, especially in light of the recent EPA maximum contaminant levels adopted in 2024. While the DoD has prioritized cleanup in communities with the highest risk of exposure and has implemented interim actions to address PFAS contamination, the incident at Red Hill highlights the ongoing challenges in managing these hazardous substances. The quick cement cover-up, although effective in the short term, may not address potential long-term groundwater contamination fully.
Thank you, Melody. We appreciate your comments. We do want to move on to our next commenter. Ruth Amato is next in line. Ruth, over to you. And we are not hearing Ruth just yet. Ruth, if you're able to hear us, please go ahead and come off mute. And we'll give about 15 more seconds, and then we will be moving on to our next commenter, Joanne Stanton. But let's hold and see if Ruth is back with us. Ruth, are you with us? Okay, well, so let's go ahead and move on next to Joanne Stanton for a comment. Joanne?
Thank you for your efforts, everybody, for helping make this meeting possible. My name is Joanne Stanton, affected community member, co-founder of the Bucksmont Coalition for Safer Water in PA. Earlier this year, the EPA set the proposed MCL for PFAS at almost non-detect, sending a strong message that these toxic forever chemicals have no safe level of exposure. So help us understand how the DoD, one of the country's worst PFAS polluters with the largest budget in the US government, who has told Congress they have enough money to deal with PFAS, not have the ability to follow the same MCL policy everyone else has to. Every private well owner in DoD surrounding communities deserves immediate PFAS remediation to the safe levels set forth by the new drinking water regulation. No exceptions, no priority list. The current policy falls short on protections, clear guidance, and timelines, handcuffing site managers tasked with putting this policy into action. In some instances, this new policy has impeded progress that was previously being made. Prior to the release of this memo, our DoD sites in Warminster and Horsham, PA had a pretty good system in place working with private well owners to ensure they had access to testing and clean drinking water. For some residents around the former Warminster Naval Air Base, this memo has actually delayed access to safe drinking water. This policy now makes it difficult to immediately provide bottled water to residents with unsafe PFAS levels. Under this policy, if bottled water is being provided to a private well owner, it can continue. However, if a new residential location is identified with PFAS levels greater than 12 and less than 70, the site must now request a waiver to provide bottled water to those households, even if just during the interim period while other alternative solutions such as public water hookup are implemented. Waivers equal delays and block interim actions. Worst yet, bottled water waivers can be denied and have been denied in our community, continuing to unnecessarily expose families to dangerous levels of PFAS while they wait, sometimes for months, for alternative water. This is unacceptable. Mr. Owens, what would you say to these families who, after the military has contaminated their wells, now have to request a waiver and wait for something as simple as bottled water to drink?
Joanne, thank you very much for your comment. Thank you for joining us tonight. Let's move on next to a comment from Anthony Budison.
Hello, my name is Anthony Budicin. I am the Director of Environmental and Regulatory Compliance at Eastern Municipal Water District, also known as EMWD. EMWD is a water, wastewater, and recycled water agency that serves a population of nearly 1 million people in Southwest Riverside County, California. We are an essential public service provider supplying drinking water to communities surrounding March Air Reserve Base located in Riverside County. EMWD appreciates the DoD issuing the policy memorandum dated September 3rd, 2024 that provides a summary of DoD's interim and long-term remedial actions relative to PFAS cleanup as it relates to the PFAS drinking water MCLs issued by the EPA in 2024. We want to express our support for the Department of Defense's efforts to begin remediation for public water systems with PFAS levels below 3 times the MCL, as outlined in the policy memo, commitment to expedite action for public water systems impacted by PFAS, focusing on the most affected sites and collaborating with regulators to address MCL exceedances, an approach to remediate down to MCLs or background levels following CERCLA and EPA guidance to addressing PFAS drinking water impacts. PFAS contamination is a shared challenge, and our ongoing collaboration with DoD is essential for addressing its impacts. We value the support and guidance from DoD as we work together with our local partner, March Air Reserve Base, and the Air Force Civil Engineer Center to safeguard water quality for our communities. We appreciate DoD's focus on transparency by providing this listening session. Open engagement with communities is vital to making policies that reflect public health needs, especially for water agencies serving PFAS-impacted areas. EMWD is committed to our partnership with DoD in implementing these standards effectively. Together, we can ensure public water systems meet the highest safety standards for PFAS and continue making progress on this critical issue. Thank you.
Anthony, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate that. We'll turn next to Christopher Clark. And do we have Christopher Clark on the line? Okay, Christopher, if you are speaking, we are not able to hear you just yet. We'll wait another 15 seconds or so before we move on to Joe Primo next. Okay, Christopher, are you with us? It sounds like Christopher may not be with us, so let's go ahead and proceed to our next commenter, Joe Primo. And Joe, go ahead. Do we have Joe Primo on the line? Okay, it looks like Joe Primo is not with us. Just out of an abundance of caution, I do want to give a few more moments just in case we miss someone in the list. Do we have Joe Primo with us? Okay. Okay, well then that takes us to Mark Favors. Mark, you're up. Over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you for taking our comments and listening to us. My name is Mark Favors. I'm a military veteran whose family suffered extensive contamination for decades from Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And so I would just like to comment that I really need the DOD to really start taking this seriously and following the EPA guidelines. And another concern I have 4 family members who are currently serving on active duty, including a niece in the United States Navy. We have a family in the Air Force and the United States Marines. So I also want to make sure that the DOD is also taking seriously those on active duty who are in the military serving. And I think that one of the best things to do that is to follow the EPA guidelines and not, waver off of them. We are the greatest country in the world, so we can test all the wells at once. We could do all these things. As our United States Army trained nurse, we got through COVID, and I saw what this country could do during COVID and its response. So I don't think that there should be any working slow or any delays in getting this treatment and taking care of the American citizens and military families throughout the United States and those who are also victims of this contamination. So I would just appreciate that the DOD move more expeditiously, just like those veterans do when they serve this country. They do what they can, the best they can, and they take care of it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Favors, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your comments. We do want to bounce back, if we could, to Michael High. I believe Michael High is on the line now. And Michael, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me all right?
I can.
My name's Michael High, and I am the admin member for the K.I. Sawyer Toxic and Exposure Group for Air Force Base Hazardous Waste and Cleanup Toxic Base, as well as Portsmouth as well. One of the major things that I see with these policies is you guys keep putting policies out, but yet take years to implement anything. K.I. Sawyer, as well as Wordsmith, both of their plumes are known to be at least 1,000 parts per trillion. And yet people on those bases don't even, people that are living there now aren't even aware of the issue because nobody has told them. Landowners may know, but the people that are physically living there that are renting don't know. Policies and stuff are great. They also, from what I've seen, actually cause a gray matter of trust with the locals, as well as those members that have been in the military, like myself. I grew up on KI, Georgia Air Force Base. Davis Monthan, which is also another PFAS contaminated base, as well as Wordsmith. And I actually served on Camp Lejeune. So all these bases are all contaminated. DOD only acknowledges Camp Lejeune. And it's not even for PFAS, even though PFAS has been found there. But the things that I think needs to happen is when you guys come up with these policies, make sure y'all stick to them and implement them as quickly as possible, because people are actually dying from this and they're unaware of what's going on because they're not told. And it just needs to be out better that the people know. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. We appreciate your comments. We do want to also bounce back just a bit. Lenny Siegel is with us now. And Lenny, you're up for a 2-minute comment, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. If you focus on the small number of PFAS compounds for which EPA set a standard, a maximum contaminant level, then you're going to miss important parts of the exposure and risk associated with PFAS, particularly from firefighting foam. The Department of Health in Hawaii has done an analysis and shown that if you look at all of the PFAS that are found in some of their plumes, that you have a significantly higher risk than you have simply by looking at PFOA and PFOS. That is, even, well, under the current practices and current measurement methods, DOD and other polluters of PFAS are understating the risk. So anything that weakens the standard is a double problem. First, you're understating the risk because you are not measuring and applying the toxicology for all of the PFAS compounds to which people are exposed in their drinking water. And secondly, you're weakening the standard. Now, I can understand a weaker standard for prioritizing long-term cleanup of groundwater, but for drinking water, there should be no excuse. The health-based standard for the compounds that we know about, combined with the other ones that you should be looking for, should be the basis of your response. One more thing I have to say based upon where I am. So the PFAS, the Navy left here at Moffett Field is now the responsibility of NASA, apparently. At least they're the ones doing the study. And I would like to see the Navy take responsibility for the Moffett PFAS, because Congress doesn't send money to NASA to clean up PFAS at former Navy installations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Siegel. I appreciate that. That gets us through the list of community members who did register to make verbal comments. So this concludes the verbal comment period of this evening's informational listening session. I'd like to now turn to Mr. Owens for any closing remarks you have, sir.
Thanks, Tim. And I just want to again say how extraordinarily grateful we are that the community came out the way that it did for this opportunity and to share your thoughts with us over the course of the last hour or so. Just a bit of a recap to make sure that we're leaving this in a way that can be digested by folks who weren't here for the moment that we've had tonight. We went through the process of describing the policy and our plans to incorporate the EPA drinking water standard in ongoing PFAS cleanups. I think that again we are trying to prioritize the action that is going to happen initially, and we are going to be working towards a much more robust and fulsome approach as we knock off the projects and the locations that have the worst problems first. So initial steps are being taken under this policy, and this policy will evolve as we discover more information from ongoing investigations, and then have the ability to get down into locations that have lower levels of impact from DoD releases. I think we heard loud and clear across several of the community members that there is a broad and understandable frustration with the CERCLA process and the time that it takes to be able to get after the cleanup activities that are necessary. I think that, again, that is an understandable frustration. And I think we all appreciate what the source of that frustration is, the concern for the health and well-being of your communities. And you know, there is a broad understanding that we are looking internally. There's a broad commitment that we have to look for opportunities to accelerate the rate at which we are implementing the CERCLA process. So we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to look for opportunities to accelerate these efforts nationwide in accordance with the law and in partnership with the regulatory agencies and communities like the ones that spoke out this evening. So while we are making progress, we understand that it is insufficient. We're not close to done. I think that reality brings along with it an understandable uncertainty in your communities that we are going to try to address and do our best to address via better communication. I think one of my takeaways from the comments that we heard tonight is that there are some places where the communication flow seems to be working very well, and there's other places where the communication flow can be improved. I think that what you have out of us tonight is a commitment to understand what conditions come together to make the communication work well, and what conditions need to be overcome where the communication isn't working well, as a thing that we should be working towards. I also want to address one other piece of the puzzle that was brought up relatively early, which is the fact that we're at the beginning, middle of a presidential transition. The election results are clear, and that means that people in jobs like the one that I have are going to be exiting the administration to make way for presidential appointees that are becoming after us. I just want to share one thing that the secretary sent the day after the election. It's a memorandum for all Department of Defense personnel. I want to read one particular sentence, then I want to introduce the folks that have joined me here on screen tonight. The Secretary's words are, "The department will make a calm, orderly, and professional transition to the incoming Trump administration." So what that means is I will be orderly exiting the Biden administration. And what that means is there is going to be a period of time before someone is confirmed into this position to do this work and to lead this office. In the meantime, and I will say that I am actually really pleased that the team that we have built is coming together to take up this mantle. Bob Thompson is our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment. And if everything goes according to the transition plan that we've defined, Bob will be serving in an acting capacity as the ASD. And to my right here is Ron Tickle, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environmental Management and Restoration. This is the continuity, in addition to folks like Alex, in addition to folks like people like Heidi, and many of you know Christina. These are the people that will continue to move the efforts forward as the political leadership transitions out of the Pentagon and new political leadership moves in. We can't make commitments on behalf of the next administration. I can't make commitments on behalf of the next administration. But what I can say is that our folks are going to continue to execute on the course that we are on now until additional information or additional direction, different direction comes down from the political leadership. I have a great deal of confidence in this team. I am disappointed that I'm not going to get to continue, but I do have a great deal of confidence in the team that will be here to steward this transition to the next administration. And I think that we have learned quite a bit about what we can do better. I think we've learned some about what was working well, and we're going to be using this to inform the process by which we are going to be moving forward from here. So there is and remains a strong commitment from the DoD related to the efforts that we are taking on implementation of PFAS policy and cleanup policy more generally. We appreciate sincerely your efforts to share your expertise and your concerns with both the restoration advisory boards, with forums like this, in other forums that come together to be able to learn from what we can do better. And you have our commitment, my commitment, Bob's commitment, Ron's commitment, Alex's commitment, Christina's commitment to continue to create the opportunity for these types of information exchanges to occur. Thank you sincerely again for taking the time to join this effort and to share your thoughts. We will synthesize these and get the information back out, and we will take the information we can and really work to do everything that we can in this space better than we did it yesterday. So thanks very much. Have a great night. Have a great morning. Have a great afternoon. Turn it back over to you, Tim, for closeout.
Thank you, sir, and thank you all for your participation. As a reminder, a recording of this session will be provided on the DoD PFAS public outreach page at www.defense.gov/PFAS. If you have difficulty accessing documents or would like to submit a question or comment, please email that email address you see at the bottom right, dodecicco@ageiss-inc.com. The information listening session is now concluded. Have a nice evening. Thank you.